The summer sky was bone white over dry willow. Heat sat heavy on the hills, dragging itself over the dust and fences, until even the air forgot how to move. In the middle of it, Reuben Cole sat still on his porch like part of the timber, hands resting on his knees, eyes steady under the brim of a faded hat. He had been that way most mornings, most afternoons, and nearly every dusk for the last 10 years. Since the war took his brother and the flu took his wife, he had lived alone on that ranch just beyond the ridge. 100 acres of stubborn land, 1 mule he hated, 3 hens that wouldn't lay, and silence. That was his life now, unspoken, uneventful, unshared. Most folks forgot about Reuben. Some pitied him. Others feared him. He didn't say much at town meetings, didn't come in for Sunday sermons. But he watched. He always watched. Down in the valley, the town stirred like a kicked wasp's nest. A widow had returned, Eliza May. Not that he knew her, not in any close way. But he remembered her from years ago. A pretty girl with long chestnut hair and a wildflower laugh, who married a man named Charles Riker. The man died in spring. Consumption or whiskey, nobody agreed. Left her with nothing but his name and a brother named Jed, who drank meaner and walked heavier. Eliza came back 6 weeks ago. Took a room above the old general store. Started sweeping porches and helping with ledgers. Head down, jaw tight. A widow with no children and no land, asking nothing, bearing everything. The town whispered the way only towns can. Should have married better. Heard she flirted with the preacher's son once. Maybe she likes the taste of fists. They never said these things to her face. Only in the shade, behind laundry lines and church pews. And Reuben sat, quiet as cedar, watching. He saw her leave the store just before sunset each evening, hands red from scrubbing, hair damp at the nape. She never looked up. She never limped, though she should have. He noticed the purple blooming beneath her eye 3 days after she moved in. Then the way she started wearing her collars higher, even in the heat. Jed Riker came into town drunk most Thursdays. Spat on the street. Spoke too loud. Laughed too cruel. Eliza never walked beside him. But she didn't walk away either. Maybe she thought she couldn't. Maybe she'd forgotten she could. Reuben didn't ride into town much anymore. But that Thursday, something pulled him off the porch. A need, maybe. Or an ache. He mounted his old buckskin gelding and rode the slow descent into dry willow. Dust clung to his boots, to the sweat on his neck. He bought flour, salt, and nails. Nodded to the clerk. Didn't speak. Then he tied his horse and stood under the awning of the feed store with a tin cup of warm cider, just watching the square like always. Eliza came out of the store just then, arms full of ledgers. Jed stumbled after her, shirt half-buttoned, yelling about something too slurred to catch. Folks looked, then looked away. A boy skipped a rock. A woman turned her child around. Then it happened, just like that, as if it were nothing. Jed struck her. The sound was sharp and flat, like a board snapped in two. Her head jerked sideways. The ledgers spilled into the dirt. Blood came from her nose or her mouth. Reuben couldn't tell. She didn't scream. Just knelt to gather her things, hands trembling. No one moved. Reuben's boots shifted slightly. His fingers grazed the edge of his belt, then stopped. Jed kicked one ledger aside, muttered something, and staggered off toward the saloon. Eliza kept gathering the papers in silence, though her hand left a smear of blood on one page. Reuben watched her stand, straight-backed, pale, the sun behind her caught in her hair, which she'd left loose today. And for a second she didn't look bruised or broken, just tired. Tired like a house after a storm. He should have said something. He didn't. Instead, he rode back home and sat again on his porch, letting the heat press against his chest like guilt. The next morning, there was a ribbon of yellow silk tied around the fence post near his gate. No name. Just a ribbon. And he knew it was hers. He didn't ask why she left it. He just untied it gently and folded it into his pocket. That became a thing. Each morning, something new. A daisy, a strip of lace, a button. Silent offerings. And in return, Reuben left a jar of jam, a spool of thread, a wrapped bar of soap, placed gently where the post met the rail. Not a word exchanged, but the air between them began to change. He'd ride into town, sometimes just to catch a glimpse of her. She walked slower now, a little straighter. The bruises took longer to appear. Once, he saw her reach for an apple at the grocer and pause. Her hands trembled as if the very thought of sweetness hurt. Then she put it back. The next morning, an apple was on the fence, polished to a shine. She took it. She began to hum when she passed the bakery, and Reuben heard the tune later in his dreams. It wasn't joy, not yet, but it was memory stirring. He started painting the porch, something he hadn't done in years. When he finished, she left a cloth sachet of lavender on the steps. His house began to smell like a place someone could live in again. But Jed was still in town. One night, Reuben heard a horse galloping hard down the trail, a rider moving too fast. The moon was near full. He stepped out with his lantern. Eliza. Her hair was wild, her dress torn at the sleeve, one shoe missing. Her breath heaved like a bellows. She didn't dismount, just clung to the reins and gasped, "I didn't know where else." Reuben took the reins and helped her down without a word. She collapsed against his chest. He smelled whiskey on her, not from her, but clinging to her clothes. Jed. He led her inside, sat her by the stove, fetched a cup of water. "Did he follow you?" She shook her head. He passed out. I ran. Silence stretched. "I didn't do anything wrong," she whispered. "I know," Reuben said. She cried for a while. Not loud, just a slow leaking like rain through an old roof. Reuben didn't try to fix it, just sat beside her until the sobs stopped. He gave her the guest cot, though he hadn't had a guest in 10 years. She fell asleep with the ribbon still tied around her wrist. Reuben didn't sleep that night, just sat on the porch, rifle in lap, watching the path. His thoughts moved like old cattle, slow, stubborn, tangled. When dawn came, she was still there, standing barefoot in his kitchen, frying eggs like it was always her place. She didn't say thank you. He didn't need her to. The bruises had deepened on her arm, finger-shaped. That evening, he found a jar of honey on the fence, and something tightened in his chest. Jed came to the ranch 3 days later. He was sober this time, sober and sharp-eyed, and holding a folded piece of paper. "I heard she's here," Jed said. Reuben said nothing. Jed held out the paper. "She's my brother's widow. That makes me responsible. I got a claim." Reuben took the paper. Didn't read it. "Let the wind take it. You gonna stop me?" Jed asked. "No," Reuben said. "She will." Eliza stepped out of the house, just then. Hair braided, chin lifted. "She's not yours," Reuben added. Jed looked at her, then at Reuben, then back again. But something in her face stopped him. She wasn't hiding anymore. Jed mounted his horse with a sneer. "You're gonna regret this." "Already did," Reuben muttered. As the hoofbeats faded, Eliza let out a long breath. Reuben looked at her. "You want to stay?" She nodded. Not fast, not desperate, just certain. Then she added, "But only if you keep making those quiet trades." He smiled. That night, he made tea. They sat on the porch, side by side, not touching, but not apart. And in the heavy summer dusk, Reuben knew something had shifted. Not just in her, not just in him, but in the world itself, like a wolf finally catching on a worn track. It wasn't love. Not yet. But it was watching, and waiting. And maybe that was how it always began. The road between town and the ranch wasn't marked on any map. It wound through dried-up creeks, past old fence lines, and under the sullen hush of cottonwoods that hadn't seen rain in weeks. Eliza had walked it once barefoot, the sharp stones tearing at her skin, one eye swollen near shut, ribs aching from Jed's boot. That night she hadn't cried. She hadn't cursed. She just walked, because walking was still something no one could take from her. That road had no name, but it became her line of quiet defiance. In Reuben's home, there were no rules spoken aloud, no conditions. She slept in the spare cot, wore a borrowed flannel, and sat at his table each morning while he fried eggs and poured her coffee. He never asked questions. She never gave answers. And somehow that was enough. But even silence has its weight. She began noticing small things. How he folded his shirts with military precision. how the porch light always flicked on 5 minutes before dusk, how he never turned his back on the front gate when he washed up at the barrel outside. He was a man who watched the world for changes, not because he feared it, but because he had once trusted it and been burned. And she had learned not to trust even herself. Her heart, once eager, had led her into a marriage that became a cage. Her instincts had screamed during courtship, but the church had smiled, and her father had said, "He's a Riker. You'll be looked after." No one asked if she wanted to be looked after. Jed had once been charming, before Charles died, before the bottle took him whole. But there was always something coiled behind his eyes, something that saw love as a transaction, affection as leverage. When Charles passed, Jed called it fate. When Eliza flinched from his touch, he called it grief. When she finally screamed, he called it sin. And the town watched with practiced blindness. At Reuben's, there were no sermons, no judgments, only firewood stacked with care, clean water drawn from the well, and a man who handed her a plate without asking where the bruises came from. She tried to leave once. It was a week after her arrival. She had packed the little she'd brought, a hairbrush, a locket, a torn prayer book. Reuben stood by the gate, one hand resting on the post. He didn't stop her, just asked, "Do you have somewhere better to be?" She didn't. She stayed. Each day, she added something of herself to the house. A stitched cloth on the table, a cleaned window. She swept the floor twice a day, though it didn't need it. It was easier to keep her hands moving. Safer. Reuben began leaving his rifle inside. Once she laughed. He dropped a pan trying to swat a fly, and it clanged so loud it startled the chickens. The sound of her laughter filled the house like spring rain. Reuben didn't laugh with her, not right away, but something eased in his shoulders. He told her stories sometimes, not in full, not like a man recounting history, but as though testing the sound of memory aloud. Stories of his younger brother Sam, who carved birds from driftwood, of the war, and a woman named Cora, who waited for him until she didn't, of his father's watch, which no longer ticked but still sat on the mantel, like time refused to leave. She listened, and began to speak in return. She told him about her mother's apricot preserves, about a kitten she'd hidden under her bed at 9, about the way Jed twisted compliments into chains. He didn't respond with pity, only presence. And sometimes, that felt like more than mercy. One morning, she found him splitting logs behind the barn. Shirt off, sweat glistening on scarred skin. A long slash ran from shoulder to waist. She didn't ask, but she brought water, and when he drank, he nodded in thanks, eyes never leaving hers. That evening, she found him painting the porch swing. It hadn't moved in years. In town, word began to spread. Not about violence. Not yet, but about impropriety. Mrs. Dell from the bakery clucked her tongue at the post office. Living under the same roof, not even a chaperone. She's no better than she was before. The preacher frowned. The sheriff scratched his beard. The town didn't care about bruises, but it cared about appearances. Jed returned to the general store, sober and bitter. Claimed Eliza had been taken. Claimed Reuben had confused her. The shopkeeper just nodded, not wanting trouble. When Jed slapped a boy for mentioning her name, folks started listening. Reuben heard the whispers, but didn't speak. Instead, he added an extra latch to the door and began carrying 2 rifles when he rode to town. One for hunting, one for warning. Eliza baked biscuits one evening. Her mother's recipe, she said. The scent wrapped around the house, like a memory you didn't want to wake from. They ate on the porch, watching the sun bleed into the hills. She glanced at him once, biscuit in hand. "Why'd you let me stay?" Reuben chewed slow. "Why'd you think I wouldn't?" She smiled barely. Most men want something. He looked at her then, not like a man staring at beauty, but like one seeing a tree bloom in winter. "I've had something," he said. "Didn't last. Maybe now I just want peace." She nodded. "I want that too." That night, the wind picked up. Shutters creaked. Coyotes howled in the dark. And somewhere in the valley, hoofbeats echoed. Fast. Reckless. Reuben stood before the knock came. It was the sheriff. Hat in hand. Dust on his boots. "Eliza may hear." Reuben didn't answer. She's not in trouble, the sheriff added. The town's stirring. Jed's saying she's been lured, that you're keeping her. She's not a prisoner. Doesn't matter. You know how people talk. Eliza stepped out behind Reuben. Her hair was braided. Her hands were steady. I'll talk to him, she said. In the morning. Public. Let them see. Reuben didn't argue, but when the sheriff left, he checked the rifle locks again. At dawn, she dressed in her best. Plain calico, neat boots, a pinned brooch. They rode together. The town square was half full, enough eyes to matter. Jed stood near the fountain, arms crossed. Eliza dismounted first. Walked to him like a woman walking to her own trial. Don't you speak, she said. Just listen. And she told them. Not every detail, not every blow, but enough. Enough for the whispers to shift direction. Enough for a mother to pull her daughter close. Enough that no one stepped forward to defend Jed. He tried, swore she was lying, that Reuben had turned her against him. But no one looked convinced. Reuben didn't speak, just stood behind her, calm, firm, unshakable. Jed stormed off. The preacher said nothing. Later, they rode home in silence. Halfway there, Eliza asked, Do you think I ruined your name? Reuben shook his head. I never had much of one to ruin. She chuckled, then softer added, You could have left me. I still could. But you won't. He didn't answer, just looked ahead. That night, she placed a small candle by the window. For no reason, just to feel something warm flicker. He passed her the sugar without being asked. In a world where people talk too much and help too little, they had found a language quieter than shame, stronger than pity. They weren't lovers, not yet, but they were something sacred, something rare. Two people walking a road that had never waited for them, and finding it change beneath their feet. Rain came that night, not in sheets, but a soft whisper against the roof, like the land exhaling after too many months of heat. The parched dirt drank greedily. The world felt smaller in the wet hush, and inside Reuben's cabin, Eliza lay in the spare cot staring at the plank ceiling, her breath shallow, her limbs taut. Sleep hovered, but it never landed. Somewhere in the darkness, a beam creaked. A moth tapped at the glass. And from the other room, Reuben's breathing matched the storm, steady, grounded, present. She hadn't asked to stay longer, hadn't said what came next, but neither of them brought it up, as if speaking the future aloud might frighten it away. In the morning, steam rose from the yard like ghosts lifting off the earth. Reuben was already outside, stacking wood. His sleeves were rolled to the elbow, hands calloused, motions exact. He nodded when she stepped onto the porch and handed her a tin cup of hot chicory without a word. That had become their rhythm. Not silence, but unspoken things passed like thread through a needle. Acts of care, glances held just a little longer than needed. Eliza moved through the house like someone learning the shape of safety. She scrubbed the floor until it gleamed, sewed patches into his worn shirts, brushed the dust from the windowsills. Reuben, in return, mended the garden fence, fixed the drafty window by her cot, and brought back a tin of lemon drops from town. He left them in the cupboard without a note. She found them and wept, just once, then placed 3 of them in a glass jar beside his shaving kit. Still, people in town had not stopped talking. The preacher had delivered a sermon on the sanctity of union, with too many eyes flicking toward Eliza's empty pew. Mrs. Dell muttered in the dry goods aisle that some women come back worse than they left. The sheriff, though silent, had begun to visit the ranch with increasing regularity, under the pretense of checking on Reuben's rifle permits or asking after stray cattle. Each visit ended the same way: a stiff nod, a glance toward Eliza in the window, and a warning veiled as a neighborly concern. Folks don't take kindly to cohabitation outside of vows, he'd say. You know how it looks. Reuben never rose to it. He just offered coffee, spoke little, and let his presence answer what words could not. But one evening, after the sheriff's 3rd visit in as many weeks, Eliza stood in the doorway of the cabin, arms crossed over her apron, watching Reuben chop wood with more force than precision. They won't stop, you know, she said. The axe thudded into the stump. He wiped his brow. Don't matter much to me. It does to me, He looked up then, expression unreadable. "I never wanted to be the reason someone else was judged," she continued. "I've worn enough of that weight." "You're not the reason," he said quietly. "They just need something to point at." She stepped forward, slowly. "I know we've not spoken of it, but it matters. What they say. What they think we are." Reuben's voice was gravel over still water. "What do you think we are?" Her reply came without pause. "Safe." That night, he didn't sleep on the porch swing. The cot creaked under his weight as he sat beside it, his hand resting gently near hers. Not touching, just near. She didn't speak. She didn't pull away. When she woke, he was gone. But the kettle was hot, the biscuits warm, and there was a single white flower on the table. Wild. Imperfect. Real. Days turned into a quiet sort of belonging. She began brushing his coat before he rode into town. He built a new shelf for her books. At night, they sat closer. He read aloud once, a page from an old farming manual, and she smiled so hard her cheeks ached. But Jed wasn't finished. He returned to town with a plan, a knife hidden in his coat, and liquor on his breath. Told the sheriff Reuben was harboring stolen property. Claimed Eliza was his lawful inheritance, twisting the old laws to fit his needs. The sheriff, caught between duty and politics, arrived with 2 deputies. This time, Reuben didn't open the door. "I'm coming in," the sheriff warned. Reuben's voice came through the wood like distant thunder. "I'd think hard before you do." Eliza stood in the hallway, heart pounding. The sheriff hesitated. If she's there willingly, she ought to come out and say it. Reuben stepped aside. Eliza opened the door. Her hair was pinned, her chin lifted. "I'm not stolen," she said, "and I'm not his." The deputies shuffled, unsure. Reuben handed over a paper, neatly folded, written by hand. "This here's a notarized document. Says she's employed here, earning wages, of her own free will." It wasn't a marriage certificate, but it was enough. The sheriff left, grumbling. Jed, when he heard, spat and swore he'd be back. Reuben locked the door that night. Eliza watched him from a table. "You wrote that for me." He nodded once, without asking. Another nod. "You really would have let them take you to jail." He looked at her then, soft and sure. "Some things are worth the sell." She approached slowly. Her hand reached out, rested on his arm. "I've slept in a bed where vows were made and bruises followed. This house, this roof, this air, I don't need papers to call it sacred." He didn't speak, just let her fingers slide down to his palm. They stood like that a long while. When thunder rolled in the next day, Reuben built a fire early. Eliza made stew, humming a tune from childhood. The storm blew hard against the walls, but the cabin held. And inside, they moved like 2 parts of something finally whole. Later, she sat beside him on the bed, not the cot, not the chair. "I'm not offering promises," she said. "Just presence." "I'll take that," he whispered. They lay back, side by side. Nothing rushed, nothing assumed. Just breath and rain and warmth. Outside, the storm passed. But inside, something had just begun. The first sign was smoke. Not thick or choking, just a curl, almost graceful, rising from the far side of the ravine. Reuben saw it while mending the chicken coop, a nail halfway into a board when the scent reached him. Acrid, familiar, wrong. He stood slowly, his instincts sharpening like a blade. The wind was wrong, too, hot and restless, dragging the smoke low to the earth instead of lifting it. Somewhere in the woods, something was burning, and it wasn't brush. "Eliza," he called, calm but urgent. She appeared on the porch, drying her hands on her skirt. One look at his face was enough. "Get your boots," he said. Now. They moved like practiced dancers, each step purposeful. Reuben saddled the horse, tied a bucket to each stirrup. Eliza brought a jug of water, wrapped a wet cloth around her face, without being told. This was no barn fire. This was vengeance. As they reached the rise above the property, the full shape of it came into view. The north line of the fence, old, brittle wood, was ablaze. Flames crawled with fingers made of hunger, licking the dry grass, racing toward the barn. Reuben didn't shout. He dismounted, passed Eliza a bucket, and ran to the edge of the fire line. Together they beat at the flames, dousing the smaller ones, trampling embers. Sweat slicked his back. Her hands blistered. Time melted into smoke and heat and breath. And still something was wrong. There were no lightning strikes today. No spark from equipment. No careless traveler's campfire. This was set. Then he saw it. A boot print. Deep fresh. Pressed into the mud, just beyond the barn. Jed. Reuben straightened slowly. Smoke swirling around his shoulders like a warning. His lungs burned. His heart didn't. "Eliza," he said, voice low. "Go back to the house. Lock the door." She looked up, sat on her cheeks, eyes wide. "No. He's here. Somewhere. I need you safe." Her jaw clenched, but she obeyed. He turned toward the tree line. Jed stepped out of the shadows with a bottle in one hand and a shotgun in the other. "I told you," he slurred. "She's mine. Always was." Reuben didn't flinch. "She was never yours." Jed's lip curled. "You think you're some kind of hero, letting a whore sleep in your bed. You think she's clean now, just 'cause she cries quieter." The rage was expected. The shotgun wasn't. Reuben's eyes flicked to the barrel, then to Jed's grip, sloppy, drunk, but deadly. "She ain't yours to save." Jed spat. "She's mine to punish." Reuben didn't reply. He stepped forward once. Jed raised the gun, but he was too slow. Reuben moved like the wind breaking loose from stone. He grabbed the barrel, yanked it sideways. The gun discharged into the dirt, spraying grit and smoke. They wrestled in the mud, Jed heavier, louder, but Reuben steadier. Years of holding his grief in his fists gave him something Jed couldn't match. The shotgun clattered away. Jed swung wide. Reuben ducked, drove his shoulder into Jed's ribs, sent him sprawling into the embers near the fence. Jed screamed. Fire caught the hem of his coat. He rolled, cursed, slapped at the flames. Reuben didn't move. "You come here," Reuben said softly. "You burn my fence, my land. You bring fire near her." His voice was shaking now, not with fear, but with fury forged in silence. "You think this is about property, about pride." Jed crawled to his knees, coughing. "This is about honor," Reuben said. "Something you never had." Jed lunged again, this time with a knife drawn from his boot. The blade flashed, but Reuben was ready. He grabbed Jed's wrist mid-strike, twisted hard. The knife dropped. With one swift motion, Reuben swung his elbow into Jed's jaw. Jed dropped to the ground, moaning, stunned. Eliza stood at the edge of the yard now, rifle in her hands. Barefoot, tear-streaked, but unflinching. "Are you all right?" she asked. Reuben nodded, chest heaving. "It's over." "No," she said, stepping forward. "Not yet." She knelt beside Jed, who was groaning, trying to crawl away. "I told you once I wasn't yours," she whispered. "Now I want to hear it from you." He spat blood. "You're nothing." She didn't blink. "Say it." "You're not mine," he muttered. She looked at Reuben. "Tie him. Let the sheriff decide what he's worth." Reuben dragged Jed to the barn, bound his hands, and left him under guard of the tether post. By morning, the fire was out. The fence was ash. But the house still stood, and the porch was untouched. The sheriff came before noon. He saw Jed. He saw the scorched earth. No one argued. That afternoon, Reuben sat on the porch, staring at the sky. Eliza came with 2 mugs of coffee. She sat beside him in the rocker he had repaired weeks ago, the one she had never dared to use before. They didn't speak for a while. Finally, she said, "He'll go to prison." Reuben nodded. She sipped her coffee. They might still talk. "Let them." She turned her face to him, the sunlight soft on her cheek. "You never asked me to stay." "I never had to." A bird sang somewhere in the cottonwoods. She reached into her apron and pulled out a slip of fabric, lace, delicate, once part of her wedding veil. Without speaking, she tied it around the porch beam. "A blessing," she said. "Not a vow. Not yet." He smiled. Then she placed her hand in his. "But I'm not leaving." Their fingers intertwined, calloused and careful, scarred and soft. The house had no steeple, no preacher, no ring. But beneath the porch, where embers once threatened, Something better had burned its way through truth. Not love declared in front of crowds. Love proven in fire, in fists not raised, in a man who watched and waited, then stood. A rider passed on the trail later, tipped his hat toward the porch. Word would spread. But Reuben didn't care. Eliza leaned her head on his shoulder, eyes closed, a half-smile forming as the breeze lifted the lace. It danced above them like a prayer spoken from the earth upward, not heaven down. And far off, behind them, the road that had never waited for either of them finally felt like home.